always. So welcome everybody to the Faculty of Clinical Informatics Special Interest Group for Clinical Safety. And also, this is a joint invitation, as you know, for the National CSO group as well, those national CSOs who are on the NHS Digital list. So I'm chairing today, Sebastian Alexander. I'll let each individual introduce themselves who are on the panel, so you know who we are. Just a few housekeeping points as always. If you could all go on mute whilst not speaking. We are recording today's session, so this will be available via the Teams site on the faculty website, and we are also making the slides available as well in PDF format. But if we can hold questions until the end of the first presentation, I'm happy to take questions by chat or verbally. We'll see how many people join us. Often it's easier via the chat mode, and I'll try and coordinate the questions as we run through those. So very warm welcome to you all. So I want to do some quick introductions. I'm Sebastian Alexander. I'm the Strategic Clinical Lead for Clinical Safety in NHS Digital, and I'm also one of the founding fellows for the Faculty of Clinical Informatics and one of the organisers for the Special Interest Group for SIG, the Special Interest Group for Clinical Safety. And I wanted to just hand over to Clive and then Maggie, just so you can just say hello quickly, Clive.
Yes, good afternoon. My name's Clive Tomsett. I'm a clinical safety working independently.
Good, thank you. That's Clive. And Maggie?
Oh, hello, I'm Maggie. I'm a registered nurse. I work for South Central West Commissioning Support Unit, and I'm a clinical safety officer. And I've sort of been making it up as I go along for quite a long time.
I'd also just like to welcome Joe as well, Joe Jubb. Just could you say hello, Joe?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Joe. I'm the Communications and Membership Officer at the faculty.
Just finally, just say hello from Christian.
Hello everyone.
Christian, just so you know, is our kind of business support in NHS Digital for these meetings. So thanks to you all for joining. Thanks for all the work putting this presentation together. We're going to talk a little bit about the clinical safety case reports, and I'm going to let this unfold as we go through. But we thought it'd be very useful to bring some practical experience of the writing of slightly different clinical safety reports to this group, just for comment and for your information. And the slides and the documents have been circulated before we start. So you should have visibility of those. And we're going to flip from one presentation to the other. We're going to start with Clive Tomsett first, who's going to take us through the presentation, and then we're going to go on to Maggie. And what I suggest we do is take some questions, probably at the end of the first session, and then we'll go on for the second session. We're aiming to finish at about 2:30 exactly, and we'll see how the discussions go. So I'm going to stop speaking, but I want to hand over to Clive, just for a little bit of introduction to himself, because we couldn't hear you all together, Clive, and now we've got more people on the call. And then just a quick introduction to the topic you'll be speaking about as well. So Clive, okay. I suggest we start. We have got people joining us, as always, so we'll make a start there, Clive. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So, as I said, my name's Clive Tomsett. Essentially, I'm a freelance clinical safety officer. I have a background working for many of the vendors over the years, Accenture, BT, Cerner. Spent a lot of time in primary care, and more recently become interested in clinical safety of health technology. So, conscious that NHS Digital have an excellent program about introducing the concepts of the standards, it's always occurred to me that I've never actually seen many safety cases, or I've never had the opportunity to understand how people go about writing them, what content around the framework that's provided. So with through the faculty, Joe, Jan and Sebastian, I just thought I would put one out there for if I'm being honest, and just talk you through my experiences of writing it. So this is a, hey, you make your own judgment as whether or not it's good or bad. This one was particularly challenging because it was written relatively quickly to help a large community and mental health trust with their general governance around video conferencing, as obviously the COVID issues brought about the acceleration of something that was probably in the pipeline. So what I'm going to do is just give you a flavour of what it was like to write this and my own experiences. And please feel free to critique it, because it's not perfect by any long chalk of the word. So let me talk it through in about 10 minutes. Right, so you've got some slides and you've got the safety case. I'm flicking to slide number 2 and I'll just sort of introduce it. So one of the problems with writing a video conferencing safety case is, not surprisingly, the functionality around video conferencing was never primarily intended for health use. It was always a communication tool. So you're not going to find a clinical risk 0129 clinical safety case around any of the platforms. And believe me, I looked around. So, you know, we spend a lot of time, if I'm honest, looking at a blank clinical safety case report and wondering what I was going to do. The other challenge I had was I needed to be able to make a contribution to this organisation's wider governance considerations. So not only was this organisation looking at clinical risk, but also cybersecurity, information governance, and all those other issues around the intended use of a platform. So I didn't have much time, and you know, I wrote this over 19 days and I actually spent 64 hours. The reason I know that is I'm a contractor, so you know my time is obviously costed out. It was peer reviewed on a couple of occasions, and it had 9 iterations and 5 iterations of a hazard log, which I've included in the safety case. So from my experience, you know, I've written quite a few safety cases over the years, but it is fair to say with each and every one that I write, you know, I get that sort of sweaty palms, feeling of inadequacy, all those issues that you get when the pressure is applied to you, which in a way is quite exciting. So, you know, that's how I started this, and I'm just going to talk you through it. So the way I went around writing this one, and I'm on slide 3, and I'm going to ask you just to flick to section 6 of the safety case, which I hope will come up on the screen. So the critical thing, like most things in life, is what are you actually trying to achieve? What is the point of exit? So actually a bit of time talking about the scope in this particular case around video conferencing was quite important. Now I'm going to pause and you will see that actually there were 6 component parts to video conferencing. So the organisation wanted to use video conferencing on a one-to-one basis internally. It wanted to use the same externally on a one-to-one basis. It wanted to be able to communicate internally and externally with groups of people. And because of the COVID issues, it wanted to be able to talk to its service users. Now, service users are patients in an NHS setting and clients in a social care setting. So it wanted to be able to do that and also engage groups of people. So when we started to think about what it is we were going to do, we needed to sort of consider some of those elements. And, you know, I spent a fair bit of time looking at some of the considerations. The other issue I had is that, interestingly, this particular organisation was using many video conferencing platforms. It was using Teams, it was using Zoom, it was using Skype. So what we tried to do is elevate it to say what we're actually interested in doing is, rather than sort of getting wound up of the particular benefits of and risks of one particular platform, let's look generically at what these sort of these platforms present. So that was how I started. Just flicking back, if I may, then Joe, to section 5 on page 11. One of the other issues I had was, you know, with the NHS framework, was to try and do something that would comply with the standard. And as I mentioned, you know, there was no 129 standard that I could ring up Zoom and say, you know, could you give me your clinical safety case? That was never going to happen. And coincidentally, there was no 160 work that I could find available to be able to do that. So we came up with this idea of sort of creating some sort of, you know, hybrid type way of doing it. And also remember, the thing's actually being deployed. So in a way, it was also a forensic examination to see, you know, could we look at, you know, experiences. And that was brought about with the issues around, you know, COVID-19. And as that organisation was looking to rapidly scale up its opportunity to provide care remotely. So there were some interesting drivers which I had to be conscious about not compromising the quality. So flicking then to section 7, page 11, Joe, if I may, we decided that a sort of, you know, a less is more approach would be the way to go. So in respect of video conferencing, you know, what could go wrong? What were the presenting risks? What, if anything, was in place to control it, and what controls were needed? So, you know, that's the process we went through. So we used sort of, you know, less is more. And then I just followed the methodology that's set out in the DCB 160 standard. And again, what I'm trying to do is link the two things together. So rather than sort of skating out into the unknown, I had a framework, you know, NHS Digital Provider Standard. And whether or not you love it or hate it, it does give you a structure. And I think that's the critical thing to say here. So you'll see the method follows, you know, defining the scope, identifying the hazards, all those that are set out in the standard. So that was really useful. And then what I tried to do then was use that process to think about how to generate the necessary candidate hazards. Because I didn't have the luxury of running a hazard workshop. I had the opportunity to speak to individuals, but I couldn't actually run a hazard workshop. So I was looking for something to be able to generate hazards. So flicking forward then, if I may, in terms of chronology to section 11, you'll see that I didn't actually write this document out in a sort of start at the beginning, work through. So the other thing I had to do was just sort of spend a time looking at the criteria. And again, every NHS organisation will generally have a variance on a risk matrix, and they'll have qualifications. So, you know, this was quite important that I used language, risk management language that was appropriate to the organisation I was working in. So when you started to be able to present the findings back to these guys, you know, they were comfortable that you were using risk management measures that were specific to the organisation. So from that, I spent a bit of time with that. I then sort of went to look about the assurance. So going to section 8, if I may, Joe. For me, this was probably the most fun part, if fun is the right word. I thought what I'd do was I'd do a literature review, and I'd try and hunt out any of the experiences people had about video conferencing. And, you know, that was actually very informative. There was a lot of stuff out there. More significantly, there was a lot of evidence-based research too that emerged from primary care. And what I decided to do was, you know, not plagiarize it, but reference it and be completely honest and say, look, this isn't Clive's work. This is Clive just identifying where there are examples of good practice and evidencing them. Remember, at the end of the day, the safety case is essentially the presentation of evidence-based common sense. So why not do it that way? So what I've then done here in section 8, and that was where I spent most of my time, was find all the evidence, and that evidence is actually at the end of the document. Every bit of it is linked and researched and referenced, and I've summarized it here. And, you know, it provided some interesting findings. So I'm just going to pick one as an example. You know, video conferencing is not a substitute for using the telephone. Is a good example of how you might use video conferencing in a safe way when you're considering what services you're going to provide it for. So, you know, without expanding on that, there was the point I'm making is, you know, we did this research, and in section 12 at the end, you don't have to go there, Joe, there's all the related links to the documentations, and the key sources are also provided at the end in the appendix. So very useful for me, and actually gave me an opportunity. The other thing I'll say is the research was global. So actually a lot of it came from Australia, for example. And if you think about it, Australia is a very large country. So, you know, they probably have quite a lot of experience about maintaining people in their remote farmsteads in the Australian sort of outback. So, you know, there was good opportunities to get that experience. So my point is, I tried wherever to provide some evidence before I started writing it up. I then paused and I sent the clinical safety case back for review. As I said, the client is a chief clinical information officer charged not only with clinical risk, but information governance, cybersecurity. So this was fitting within a framework and a format. So after I did that, I then actually spent some time looking at the outcome of the safety assessment. So I've reproduced it in section 9 on page 18. Thanks, Joe. And essentially, what this is just a walkthrough of all the particular hazards. So at this stage, all I did was identify, in this case, 9 hazards. I named, I described them, and I spent some time looking at the clinical impact. And remember what I said at the beginning, it wasn't only specifically about the platform, it was the type of usage, be it one-to-one, be it groups. So you'll see in the hazard log, and that's replicated there, the considerations. Again, here I have to credit NHS Digital. Sean White had done an awful lot of work around the GP's future and created this generic hazard log. And to be honest, you know, I cheated a bit and thought, well, why don't we consider e-consultation? You know, that's not dissimilar to video conferencing. So that was an opportunity to import some experience there. And then, then I spent some time ranking them. So I have an issue about ranking hazards, either, initial or residual. It's always subjective. So, my caution is you have to start somewhere and you just have to make an assessment. So I don't get too excited. I just rank them. And what that tends to do is it garners interest, particularly in the reviews. So we then thought about that. And the next thing was then just sort of giving some consideration to the hazard controls. And, I then spent a lot of time looking at the sorts of controls that generally I think you'll find are pretty common sense, that are around sort of, policy, procedure, governance, appropriate training, how the business may or may not be affected, and applied those. I think, interestingly, the one thing that surprised me was around some of the inherent hazards of using video conferencing in a sort of concurrency. So, as the volume of users increases, your infrastructure might not be able to maintain consistent video conferencing facilities. So, there was some interest for me. Moving on to slide 6 then. Having done all that, I went back to write up the introduction. So, thanks, Joe, section 3, page 9, I think. So this was now an opportunity, having done all that work, to sort of pause and go back and say, right, what I need to do is sort of present this information in a sort of, a couple of paragraphs. And this is where I made the references to, the NHS's strategic objectives within the long-term plan, the fact that video conferencing features very significantly. And interesting that the COVID-19 pandemic was just was an opportunity to sort of accelerate some of that stuff that was in place. So again, when I write the introduction, I've made references to, some of the benefits, and I've tried to balance some of the sort of risk considerations. And again, at the end of the day, it's very important to say, look, I'm just producing a safety case and making an assessment. The final decision to use video conferencing or not, and the choice of the platform, does ultimately rest with the clinicians that are engaged in using that. So, nobody is taking that decision making away. This is just adding some intelligence to help them ensure that if they choose to use video conferencing, then it is fit for purpose. Skipping down, Joe, to section 4, if I may, I just then looked at why I've done this, so why did I set out to do this? So, this was about good practice. This is about, reminding people that sometimes things can be lost. So it's adding to that corporate memory. And, it's just a piece of good governance within a complex organizations. So, good practice, bearing in mind the COVID stuff, corporate memory. And again, I'm trying to comply with good practice from the DCB 160 standard. So that's a bit about that. And then I think the critical thing for me, if I can go to slide 7, is, wow, Clive, don't get too carried away here. There's vast amounts of information that you're trying to share. So what do people actually need to know? And I think that's, for me, the pivotal point. So, the critical thing then for me in this whole safety case is contained in section 10, if I may just flick to that. And what I'm trying to do here then is represent the findings, the inherent hazards, and the proposed or purported controls to different groups of people. So you can see in this particular case, those groups of people would be, the clinicians, they would be those people that are information governance professionals, they would be those people who are concerned with the technical side or the provision of facilities. So within that section 10, I've broken that all down into functional and non-functional considerations and represented that. So the reason I'm doing that is to provide some intelligence back to those groups of people. And I think for me, that was one of the more important things, was not to forget what it is you're trying to do. It's all very well writing safety cases, but it's equally challenging to be able to communicate the core messages back to those individuals. So, I spend a bit of time about that, doing that. And then I came to the completion. So essentially, I went back to the top of the document, section 2, if I may, Joe, very briefly. And I wrote up the statement. The DCB standard says, you should provide a statement. So, hey, this is what I did. I identified 9 hazards, I detailed them, and I've communicated them. Sebastian's very keen on the safety justification. So, bearing my audience in mind, from a regulatory perspective, someone like Sebastian would like to see some justification. So, here's a little statement around the justification. And then, the document I paused, and then I sent the document out for its second review. So, what we then do is we added all the related documents, we checked all the links, we provided the glossary of terms, we reproduced the hazard log that's contained in the document, reviewed and checked it, sent it for review, and then it was ultimately signed off. I'm just very conscious of the time. So that's essentially my experience of writing up this generic safety case in respect of video conferencing. He pauses. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thanks very much, Clive. That's really a lot to cover, I know, in a brief time. There are a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to clarify a couple of things. We had a question: did you conduct a patient safety assessment or hazard workshop?
And the answer to that,
as I said earlier in the presentation. So, Clive, can you just answer the question again?
So,
approach that, Clive.
Can you hear me? I was unable to.
You're cutting out. Just start again, Clive. Sorry, you cut out for about 3 seconds.
Sebastian, I think we can hear Clive. I think you probably need to take your video off again because we're not hearing you very well. So.
Okay. Can you try again, Clive?
Yeah. So I hope you can hear me now. The answer to the question was, within the time that I had, I was unable to run the hazard workshops. But as you will see, to balance that out, I did a swift assessment. So I used the methodology, and I had it peer reviewed twice from a representative group.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. And then there was just a quick two other kind of supplementary questions. Rick, someone saying, can we use your template, Clive, for this?
So
can we?
Sebastian, you and I have had a discussion about this. You know, I'm not paranoid one way or the other. This is an example, and you know, the previous question gives some interesting, healthy criticism in the fact that a hazard workshop wasn't run. Please feel free to use it, but what I wouldn't like to see is each of those sections just regurgitated ad infinitum for any other piece of functionality. This was just my take. So from what is the DCB 160 template. So hey, I'm not precious about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think the message is yes, but not just a cut and paste job. We often find within NHS Digital, some sections can be just some safety case reports are just cut and paste across from different technologies. So important point, Clive, I think. Just on from Victoria was mentioning who made up the peer review group, and the kind of supplementary question, without a hazard log, how do you get adequate clinical user input? So
the group to which I was contracted was the Chief Clinical Information Officer's team. So team is clinical end users, those people responsible for the maintenance and deployment of the application. So a representative group of people. Okay.
Then another question from Jennifer Berry is saying, our trust is asking that our DCB 0160 documentation is streamlined if possible. Any thoughts how to streamline or how to do this surrounding governance?
Sebastian, I think probably we strayed into questions that need to happen after this presentation.
Okay.
Because I think some of these,
so let's hold that then.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Let's hold that. Then the other question was around guidance around Swift workshop, which may again stray.
Again, I think that they'll go to the next conversation. Yeah.
And Clive, thanks. Could you tell us more about the structured what-if method? Have heard of this, but never done it, he says.
Okay, so briefly, it's sort of, again, you know, I'm a simple guy, so this is just about evidence-based common sense. So as you see, what I try to do is reproduce the questions. I'm looking to challenge people to be able to get behind what they initially think about something. So, you know, tell me what happens when it goes wrong. Tell me what happens when it goes wrong. What do you do about it? What support do you get? How do you behave when you're not able to access it? What impact does it have? Just start to just tease out questions that can support a healthy discussion within a hazard workshop format. I'm just looking to be challenging. So generally, if you ask why 5 times, you'll probably get the answer you want, and essentially distilled down. That's what the Swift methodology is. It's just structurally asking why 5 times. And that's, I think, discussed in the, you know, I've provided there. It's in the process. We can look at it later on if we have time. But it's a framework to be able to take something that's subjective and make it a little bit more objective.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Clive, for that. Okay. I just wanted to ask you a question from me, really, Clive, on the 64 hours of work that this took. Was that something that would be a higher than normal amount of work? How would you grade this on safety cases that you've been involved with? video conferences is very complex. We know that. So just a general thought.
Okay.
Clive.
So as a contractor, I get asked this loads of times. So I've got several clients at the moment who ask me how long these things take. So remember that the clinical safety case is an artifact. Behind that is, you know, the amount of work that is involved about creating a culture, engaging an organization in the concepts of clinical risk. So if you're going to add those, the hours do mount up. You can't just pitch up, deliver something, you know, cold. You've got to check out how an organization works and be able to lever that. But to answer your question, Sebastian, the honest answer is to create a clinical safety case that is peer reviewed several times, has a hazard workshop, has all the evidence, would, in my view, take between 10 and 15 days.
Fine, thanks. I suppose there's a bit of a more general question about project scope. Again, we may cover this later, but how do you keep up with change in project scope over a period of time and assessing risks, Clive?
So I always, when I do the safety cases, I always say to my clients, this document is correct at the time it was written. You need in your governance process to review it at certain stages in the life cycle or annually anyway. So if you're having, you know, a substantial enhancement, that's a good opportunity to review it. If not, you ought to be reviewing it every year just to check that nothing has changed.
Yep. Okay, agree with that. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Clive, for that. There are some other general questions coming in around literature reviews, which you might try and address at the end of the towards the end of the meeting, and other more general questions. But I don't know whether there's anything specifically anybody else wants to ask of Clive, and I'm quite keen to move on to Maggie's presentation. Then we try and take up some more general comments around this. So I would like to just thank Clive very much for your presentation, really interesting. And I'd like to just hand over to Maggie now. And Maggie, would you be good enough to introduce yourself again? Because we've had lots of people joining since you started.
Yes.
And then I hand over
just
to screen
check
control.
that you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, that's coming up.
And most important point, when I move on to the next slide, can you see that? So can you see the question I'm asking? Who am I and what am I doing here?
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello. So I am Maggie Lay. I am a registered nurse, and I spent at least 20 years in the community, in community hospitals and on the district, and was driven into clinical informatics, I suppose, by the paucity of information that was shared about my patients. So I found myself clinical informatics lead and clinical safety officer for South Central West CSU. And those of you who were on the call earlier will know I have been making the CSO role up as I go along. And in my work in SCW, we support CCGs, SDPs like us at NHS England, amongst other people. My experience is predominantly in shared records, but because I was a clinician, they found me in digital. They pushed me on the clinical safety course. Now, I am Andy, Cara, I see you're on the call, and other people. You know that I'm a friendly critic or a critical friend. I think clinical safety in health IT projects and programs is brilliant. I have to say, I think the way it's applied sometimes makes us lose the will to live. So what I'm doing is I'm going to tell you a brief bit about what I've learned about digital clinical safety. And the reason I'm calling it digital clinical safety, because it is known as clinical safety in the manufacture and use of health IT systems, which is unhelpfully shortened to clinical safety, which means nobody outside this sphere knows what we're talking about. So I am pushing to have it shortened to digital clinical safety. And when I've done that, I will give you an overview of the digital clinical safety work we did for Digital First Primary Care during COVID, which was incorporating video group consultations. And the irony is that Clive and I didn't know the other person was doing it. So there we go. So what I've learned, first of all, that digital clinical safety doesn't exist in isolation. I'm hoping some of these slides will back up what Clive said. That's the plan. So there we are. We have to, by some sort of statute or obligation, do a clinical safety case. We have to do, which is the IG safety, and we have to make certain it's technically safe. But making it safe doesn't make it usable, doesn't make it useful, and certainly doesn't make it valuable. So the risks and the benefits, the technical, the clinical, the data protection are all part of the same pattern. And as such, I think all the documentation should be around the whole thing rather than just the bit they're doing. So what I've for me, the way it works for me as a clinician and as somebody who thinks clinical informatics and clinical safety should be as much part of what we do as infection control and hand washing. So it is a structured way of describing a clinical risk and its mitigations in terms that others will understand. And that to me is the thing, it's that communication bit between the people who are really anxious about something and the people who are spending the money. So it's not all about the risk, it's actually about the mitigations and who was responsible for them. And it's not all about the software, it's about the people who use it and what it's for. Okay, so that's where I'm coming at it from, and I think that's where we need to do some work to think about making that really applicable to everybody. Okay, and then this is my rant. You may not be able to see the screen very well, but it won't work without a governance structure. My bitter experience has been that it starts off in a project and program. We get brought in right at the end, the assurance people, to do the clinical safety or to do the DPIA or whatever it was when we started. And it gets bounced around between those two layers, and we do not give the exec the information they need in a way they can understand it, the information to make the decisions about whether to proceed or not. So the decision, the risk owner is the exec, whoever that exec may be. Simple in a single organisation, hugely complex in LICAs and integrated care partnerships where there is not even a memorandum of understanding about that responsibility. Similarly, in my experience, and apologies if you get this right in your organisation, there is nobody to hand it over to. So that we think about clinical safety being something to do with projects. It's not, it's something to do with a product. And that needs to be managed in the life cycle of that product until its end. And that needs to be managed. So we need to hand over that process to the operational management. So this is quite a busy slide, but it's because it incorporates lots of things I need to rant about, but this sort of sums it up. The last thing, really, nearly the last thing, it's not an exam question, okay? So my experience is that people see all the framework, which is a wonderful framework, and all the documentation, which is not as wonderful, and they think, I've got to do all this, otherwise I'll fail. It's about all the information you could share and what they really need to know. We do not need to be giving execs long, detailed exam questions. We need them to be confident of what we're doing, and that we need to give them information on which they can make a decision. So let's keep it simple. So this is how I have evolved, and this is a learning process all along. And one of the reasons I'm sharing this with you is because I want this to be a discussion. Is I think there is a digital clinical safety folder. The published document is a handbook for the product, which is the NHS Digital. The nearest document they've got is the clinical risk management system. Is what are we doing? How are we doing this? But there needs to be in an organisation for this product. So the application of this product for this system. This is the handbook. So this will schedule whether it needs to be reviewed annually or every decade or what the plan is for reviewing it. And then a number of small, short clinical safety cases which are attached to this. So think of it as your car logbook and your MOT certificates and your other things that are done out. The hazard log and the clinical safety plan, in my view, are iterative documents that are referred to in these reports, but should not be given to the exec on which they make a decision. So, NHS England, a digital first primary care total triage. Total triage is not just the software. When the COVID started, lots of people said, yes, we've got total triage. And what they meant is they bought eConsult. Okay, so which didn't mean to say that it was in place at all. So this is an overview of what total triage is. It's a process for making certain that all all requests for any interaction in primary care is dealt with in the same way as triaged, rather than just respond to it in the old-fashioned way. So I became involved in the rapid procurement framework of the total triage software because of COVID. Okay, so there were a number of people who hadn't even bought the software, and so there's a rapid procurement for people to come and do that. So I was involved. I was asked to be involved in the procurement cycle of this at the evaluation and selection part of the cycle. And that was quite interesting. It was slightly out of my comfort zone because I'm much more used to working in that sort of 0160 field, but this was actually reviewing the 0129s and other assurance documentation. So we got in a group of some people who I'm in awe of because they know about technical things that I don't, and we asked ourselves the question: has the documentation been submitted? We asked ourselves, is the documentation relevant? And we checked that documentation is not just NHS digital templates not filled in, which my experience is that is exactly what it is. So lots of people just submit that. So having done that, you say, okay, fine, we've passed. But what I was looking for, so I could, in my role and my clinical role, is I wanted documentation that tells me what their clinical risk management approach is, what they have done, what they have learnt, and what risk they're handing over to the deploying organisation. And that, to me, is the useful bit. Okay, I don't care about the documentation. I want to know that information in it. So we did all that, and that was really good. We worked over weekends. This is my cup of tea arriving. Thank you. So we worked over weekends and we reviewed all the stuff. And so yeah, the job was done. So I asked, okay, who's going to be doing the 160? And the reply was, well, the deploying organisations. And I thought, it's a lot of wheels being reinvented. And then I thought, not all those wheels are going to be actually fit for purpose. So can we think about this? That we're in COVID. Can we step up and do a little bit more than just hand over to the responsibility to other people? So we started some 0160 CRM activities, and we had some hazard identification. Now, I'm sorry, somebody, Claire, I think it was, somebody was asking about hazard workshops and saying, did you have a hazard workshop? Well, you know, you can't always have a hazard workshop, can you? Because you can in simple things, but you can't in complex ones, but you have to go through the process of identifying hazards. So we gathered together in meetings and some workshops and phone calls and putting it all together, talking to people who'd already deployed total triage software to say, what was it like for you? We did some risk evaluation, and we put together some experts and people and saying actually what risks are associated with that hazards, and as again Clive was saying, it's a very subjective thing, but you need to have the right people in the room to come up with some thinking about it. And I actually find the National Patient Safety Agency matrix the most useful one to use, because quite often those hazards don't just have a clinical effect, they have a IG effect or anything else. So the National Patient Safety Agency matrix allows you to assess a hazard over a number of domains. So that is my chosen one. And indeed in this one, clinical risks were hard to distinguish from the IG risks. So we did that. And then we did the mitigation identification, and this to me is the key. So are the mitigations to do with system design? Are they to do with testing? That's largely in the sphere of the supplier. Is it about the training and communications? Is it about business process change? And significantly, one of the key mitigations of business process change in total triage processes is using external resource and support. And this needed a DPIA. And in our conversations with people, they said, we can't do that, we're not allowed. So that's like that handover between the different domains. And we produced a hazard log, okay? And I'm just going to, because actually you can't open things here, I'm going to just show you what this hazard log briefly looks like. It looked like this. Okay, it was huge. It went on and on and on and on and on. And what we did is those of us who in the hazard workshops and in the analysis workshops came to a conclusion on what the overall risk was, and then made some recommendations about whether this was software design and technical, is it testing, training, communications, and we put some recommendations in here, and we said to the deploying organisations, you have to decide whether you want to do it, and then you have to go and decide what the mitigated risk is, because this is your risk. We are just pointing out what we know and what we recommend happens. So to go back to this, we did this. No, I need to go back to this. Sorry, I'm not hugely skilled at this. So we then wove it into something useful, and this is a genuine picture of my holiday in Pembrokeshire in early October, which I was very glad to go on. And so what we did is we produced a slide deck which we handed over to organisations, CCGs and the like. And we made clear the ownership and responsibilities, i.e. who needs to do what. We created a summary of mitigations. This is what you need to do, okay? And a classification of risk. This is why you need to do it. Okay, so hopefully I think this will open because it's Microsoft, and I'll just go through it. So this is what is published by NHS England, so this is about the video consultations. There are a number of iterations, but this is about the video consultations and the video group consultations. So we basically said, this is why we're doing it. These are the responsibilities. This is what commissioners need to be doing this. Practices need to be doing this. These are all the risks and the mitigations, and this is why I want to do it. And we tried to keep those mitigations consistent. So we didn't. So I tried to use the same phrasing, because in the end, it is, you need to think about patient consent. You need to think about safeguarding consent. You need to think about all these things. But this was just making it clear to people what we were expecting them to do and why they're expecting to do it. Okay, and then we added on a bit for group consultations. So we underwent the same process. And we came up with the same sort of documentation. These are what we need. This is what we have considered it needs to be. This is what you need to work on, and then you need to decide what your risk is. Okay, and that's where we got to. And we also gave them some tools. So we gave them the latest iteration of the hazard log, which I've shown you already. We did an interim safety case report, handing over the initial risk. We did some templates. We at the time it's called a clinical risk management system, but those of us who have been doing some of this thinking have now described it as a product handbook and a template for a clinical safety case report. And we gave them a partially completed DPIA. All of those documents happy to share with you or talk through or demonstrate on the questions afterwards. But my final slide is what happened next. Well, those slides went into the filing cabinet that is NHS England's primary care support. If they are in there, I struggle to find them, because actually we worked at pace and everything got pushed in there. But in fact, what happens when we let those slides out to the people who are deploying total triage, and they were some of my colleagues, to the trainers and to the people who are out in practices saying you need to do this, it was they said those slides were the things they needed, that were the most useful. So those of you who know me, I am not a compliance person. I like clinical safety, digital clinical safety, because we have to do it. It gives us an opportunity to do things well. But if it doesn't add value, why bother doing it? So my thing is, we need to get those assurance functions in at the beginning to inform the communications, to inform the training, to help us with the design, and to move forward. And that's it. Thank you.
Maggie, thanks so much for that. That's really, really useful. We might just keep you on online, as it were, just to answer any more general questions. And I suppose I just had one. I suppose it was kind of on the back of the question that was asked earlier around streamlining the process. And have you got any tips or tricks about streamlining for particular trusts?
Yes, I mean, so the streamlining of the process, I think, yes, is the answer. And I have got well, I'm just trying to think how best I do this. It's about stepping back from all the documents and the complexity therein of those documents, which say almost exactly the same thing in the same way 20 different times, and saying, what is it that we need to do? So that I've got 2 documents that I could share with you. I'm just trying to think how I best do this. Oh, hang on, sorry. Not being very well organised here.
So while you're doing that, Maggie, is around the trust is asking that DCB 0160 documentation is streamlined if possible. Any thoughts how to do this?
At 160. So yes. So here we are. I can open this now and I'll share it with you. Sorry. Just share my screen. I'm not losing my. Oh. Just bear with me because I can't actually see the share my screen bit at the moment. So I'll just go back to this. Is it just me, or is sometimes Teams really difficult to work?
Yeah,
I've got it here. So it's not intuitive, is it? So here we are. I talked about a clinical risk CRM handbook. Okay, so I'll go through this quite quickly. The bits in yellow are the bits where I think people need to localize it, and the other bits are sort of like generic information that you need. So that's the index. So what I'm suggesting we do is we say, okay, what are we trying to do here? What is this? The purpose of the document? This is what we're doing. The overview of the product. So what is the requirement? What service are we trying to deliver? And that could be huge, and that could probably be lifted out of the business case if it's not too wordy. But this needs to hand over to me as a jobbing clinical safety officer. What are we trying to do here? And then how the software is being used, what the mechanisms are, and what the scope of this product is. And I've put product, it could be product, it could be service, but it's not just about the software, it's how we're going to use it. And whether this is a very quick and dirty, just handing something over, we're doing a quick fix for 2 years, or whether this is a complex, the scope of is this a complex program that we'll have to revisit and we need to go back and look at the original use case, etc., etc., etc. So this is like your handbook for your product that I think needs to be started at the beginning, as soon as you commission it, before you even start the project. Then you need to document the clinical risk governance structure, the organisational chart. Who will be the people who will receive the report and make decisions based upon its contents? And if it's more than one organisation, do you know you've got every organisation represented? And that's quite complicated in primary care. Who are the manufacturers? What have they got? What's their 012 line look like? What have they done? How is it working? Who are the deploying organisations and system? How is the project, all the business as usual arranged in the CRM? All those sorts of things. Who is the assurance group? Where are the terms of reference for that assurance group? How are they going to be brought in? How do we know they're going to be made available? And then a very high level clinical risk management plan, where you schedule the routine reviews, you talk about what you do in response to upgrades and plan changes, and you have a system in place for incident management, and you know what that is. And again, on a small project or product or service, probably just that could be a page, that whole document. But for a complicated one, it needs to be there. But I, as a jobbing clinical safety officer, all the clinical informatics lead, all the nurse who's using it, need to be able to go there and say, oh, this. Okay, so then I've got all kinds of some of the things you've seen before, possibly where you might want to be scheduling your reports into a project. This one you've seen before, this one with this on Clive's piece, but not putting this stuff in every single document you do. Just do it once. Just do it once. Do it at the end so that the people who need the information have it at the top of the document, not at the end of the document. Keep it simple. The other thing I am just going to briefly share with you on that thing is I have developed a sort of process whereby you all this assurance, be it clinical safety, be it IG, be it equality impact assessment, comms training, all needs to be thought of all together at the same time and joined up, because the effect of putting my report into the filing cabinet and putting the training report into the filing cabinet of NHS England means that we repeat ourselves over and over and over again. Let's just do it in once. Let's call ourselves clinical assurance, and let's do it for the product or the service, not for the compliance exercise.
Okay,
right.
Thanks, Maggie.
Rant over.
Okay, that's really helpful. Just a couple of other questions, and I'll keep you on here, and I'll also bring Clive in. But there's a question around third-party suppliers, and I imagine third-party means a supplier, and what should they provide as assurance to deploying individual trusts? Now, Maggie, can I direct that one at you first? I won't answer this, but
Sorry, could you repeat it again? Because I've just been distracted by another comment coming in. Could you say that again?
Okay, no. So when a third party selects or buys an IT system, what should the third party provide as insurance to the individual trust?
So going back to what I said before, they need to provide evidence of the clinical risk management they have done. So they need to say, we have built this product to do this. We have done this testing. We've met these specifications or these requirements. We have undertaken these activities, and we think that you need to know this about it before you deploy it. And the example I'm going to use here, I'm sorry, I'm do anecdotes or analogies. When I bought my new Golf car 10 years ago, it had the auto hold handbrake. So they sold me the car. They gave me the handbook. They assumed I knew how to drive. They assumed I knew where I was going. They assumed I knew how to use the clutch and the accelerator and the indicators. They didn't assume that I knew how to use the auto hold. So they got in the car with me and handed it over to me. Okay. So they have handed over something that I might otherwise reasonably not have known. And that was a risk to me. They also don't take responsibility for whether I insure it, whether it's not VW's responsibility whether I can drive, whether I want to go anywhere, whether I put the petrol in. It's certainly not their responsibility whether I or tax and insure it. So that's my idea of a product. That's why I'm talking about a handbook and saying, let's do it for the product and think about those things. So sorry, I witter on, but
yep.
It is it's not the documentation, it is, have they told you what you need to know to safely deploy this product? And if they don't, ask again.
And there is a supplementary question from Jennifer, actually, and I might just bring her in, but if she can speak. But third party, I meant another organisation, another NHS organisation buying on behalf of or for another.
Yeah. Oh, hello.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Do you want to articulate that? I wasn't very good at reading your question.
No,
Jennifer.
that's okay. Thank you. Maggie, I found both presentations today very thought-provoking, because we've been doing 0160 and 0129 for many years, so we have quite a mature process, but we still have many challenges. And it's not because of our process, it's just all the different types of projects that come through. And with regards to third party, what I was saying is sometimes we have another NHS organisation, sometimes national, buying a system for us. Mm-hmm. And the stuff I would usually do, I don't always get from them. And I'm thinking, so it makes our job very hard. So I'm just kind of thinking, what should they, because I know what I would provide if I was buying a system and giving it to another NHS organisation, but I'm not getting it back. And so I'm a bit, I'm just wondering if everyone feels the same.
So I would agree with you. And the analogy I've actually used on my car, there's another car on the drive, not my Volkswagen one, but it's as if your parents have put a car on the drive expecting you to go to Newcastle and they've not asked you. Yeah. I don't think I'm right. I obviously think I've got a point. I don't think I've got to the right solution. I really, really want those of us who are doing it all the time to really build on the good work that NHS Digital and others have done and turn it into a really, really clear tool so that it helps us all. So my answer is, can we work on that and think about it? Can we do that as part of a group and come up with some best practice?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, the other challenge I also have is a medical device software.
Yes.
And that is a massive challenge because the amount of software that's being, I mean, our project can have 40 projects going through in addition to any software to do with MHRA devices. And so, and that's at one time. So I think it's also understanding which bits come under us and which comes under MHRA, and also getting the buy-in, because sometimes they don't have project managers when they buy these systems, and it's just left to the operational department to get it in, and they've got to help us with the risk.
So I think this is again going back to that governance model, because it's actually, we need to be saying this is the risk of not doing it properly. So use that hazard log approach to say, okay, you could put this in and you'll get a bit of software and nobody will use it, or they'll use it badly. It's changing that whole. I think people think that IT is magic and you put it in, it just works. And it's about those soft systems and everything that has to be in place, and educating the people whose job it is to buy it, to that they don't just buy the product, they have to buy the petrol, and they have to buy the MOT, and they have to buy the insurance and all those sorts of things. So it's educating them, but putting it in language that they understand. So yeah. So I haven't answered your question, but we need to build that up and keep it simple.
And I, Sebastian here, I just wanted to add in that we encourage trusts who are buying on behalf of other trusts to share all the safety documentation, and it's not always present though. It's not always there. So that is a problem, and that's becoming less of a problem as the years have been going by, but it's still a difficulty. I'm going to come back to there's an IG question, but I'll come back to that in a moment. But can I just bring Clive in? There was a question from Zach, and for some reason my screen's gone blank. So Zach, do you want to just direct the question directly at Clive? Could you do that by voice? Would that be okay? I don't know whether you're there, Zach. If not, I will try and articulate.
Hi, Clive. Can you hear me? Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, Clive. I was just wondering whether a testing summary statement is required within your safety case, and also have you considered any training requirements?
Sorry, could you repeat the first bit again? Sorry. So could you repeat the first bit of the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, hi. I just wondering whether you have covered any section on the testing summary statement for your safety case. Is that a requirement?
Yes. Okay, so interesting you mentioned testing. So if you look at the back of the document and the technical bit, I spent a lot of time talking about bandwidth and providing the bandwidth. And what happens with that particular safety case is it is the foundation to start to ask the questions about, have these things been tested? Who tested them? What were the results? And where can I find them? So the safety case that you've got in front of you is essentially the beginning of a journey. And you're absolutely right. Testing is not a control per se, but testing is a validation. It gives you a binary yes, no, that something is as it is intended. So you're right to ask that point. And if I was critiquing what I've done, I might have spent a bit more time increasing the testing section within that document, Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Clive.
There's also just a kind of question on general training certification. With your example of video conferencing, was there any emphasis on training?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, it's in the document in quite a considerable amount of detail, because the problem is you can't just drop video conferencing. You need to understand why you're using it, whether or not it's fit for purpose, whether or not it's the primary tool, whether or not there are other options. I mentioned the telephone, for example. So, people need to understand how to use the facilities. And look, all these people on the call, we've all been through it. How many times did you tentatively take your first steps to using Teams or Zoom and spent the first 30 seconds on mute because you didn't fully understand how to turn the microphone on? You know, so we're assuming, particularly with video conferencing, when you're talking to your patients or your service users, that they have the technology or they are informed. So there's a whole raft of unpicking assumptions and making sure that people are aware through training how best to use that facility. Sebastian.
Something about training I think is really important, but one of the things I find is people put training down as a mitigation as just a way to fill something in on this hazard sheet and saying it'll be training. And training is very rarely a mitigation for like a software error. If a software is if the software is intuitive, counterintuitive, then it's often somebody puts, oh, we'll mitigate that by training. I won't sign that off until I've seen what evidence that training is. Yeah, so I have to see that training to think, will that work? And equally, I think the trade it's about doing that high level sort of assessment of what training needs there will be alongside the clinical safety and the IG thing, to say, oh, we'll have to start thinking about this now and doing it almost so co-productively as part of the whole life cycle of the product, and actually, yeah. So lost my train of thought, but just because something's been written in a box doesn't mean to say the hazard log is there. I will not, the hazard log something's been mitigated. Just because you can doesn't mean to say you will. So it has to be there before I would be happy putting my signature to a clinical safety case report.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. This was a question from Valji, actually, a good question, I thought. To both, probably Clive first and then Maggie. How do you optimise and balance the role of the CSO and needing to understand the detail of the software product in order to make an informed and value-add decision, CSO decision, without being a software user product specialist yourself? So Clive, how did you manage that one?
So actually that's if you read between the lines of that question, that's probably a very informative question. So here's my answer. Actually, my work, I'm a catalyst. What I try and do is garner a consensus and an interest in clinical risk. So that's about creating a culture. Once you have helped people understand that clinical risk management is essentially evidence-based common sense, and if you strip out all the nonsense, they can actually do it in their sleep. You create, rather like a stone gathering moss, that is needed for you to get all the information you need to be the conduit to just articulate it. I'm actually not doing much of the work. What I'm doing is creating a culture where people are interested and challenging about not taking for granted the technology that they are going to buy, not taking for granted the answers they get about how it's going to be used, and healthily challenge it. So to your question about balancing roles, all I am is a conduit. I try and create a culture of interest, and I just let that roll through, and I pick up the nuggets from it. Because I'm all the while the clinical risk madness is in my head. I'm a single point of failure, so it's pretty pointless me being an expert or whatever where all the information is in my head. The trick is to be able to give that, to demystify something, articulate it, and allow people to have an aha moment that says, you know what, it's pretty simple, isn't it? And all I tend to do then is I'm just a governance checks and balance guy. That I'm a Virgo, so I quite like sort of breaking things into managed packages, re-articulating, constructing them. But I'm not doing the work. The testers are, the trainers are, the clinicians at the front end are. They're the ones that are actually creating the wealth of knowledge. I'm just the conduit. I hope that answers it, but I think it's a very, very important point. And if I was that expert who just went around using funny language, I'm failing. You know, it's I might as well just go home. So it's about unpacking it, simplifying it, and to Maggie's point in her slides and mine earlier, the KISS principle. If you can't keep it simple, you might as well pack up and go home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
so and it's about not being afraid to ask the stupid questions. So actually, I find the longer I've been doing this, the more knowledgeable I become about IT. But I've always been more knowledgeable about the clinical practice than my IT colleagues. So what you have to do is when you have to answer the questions from a user perspective and think, how safe will this be in my use? And if you can't answer the question, you need to bring in this SME who can. And it's about that sort of collegiality in the subject matter expertise. I forgot what I was going to say there, but I was
going to add in there, Maggie. Yeah, that's really important. But also, we always teach, bring in your kind of patients as well to look at the software.
Yeah, and all those. So it's assessing. So that it's not about following rules. So sorry, Clive, if we're going to bring astrology into, I'm a Scorpion, so you can imagine my approach to following rules and getting passionate about things. So it's not about following the rules, it's making certain you do the stuff and you know what you're doing. So you don't do a huge clinical safety case report for a tiny little project. You take a proper balance view of it and say, okay, this looks like no particular risk, we'll keep an eye on it and look at it every year. Other things, you have to bring in huge amounts of people and the patients and various people and say, where's the consensus on this and how we're going to go forward? And the point I was going to make is what I made earlier. This is about describing clinical risk in the terms that others might understand. So our job is not to know it, but to describe it, to quantify it and turn it back into some stuff to language that the people who are making the decisions will understand. So if a very stressed nurse says, that's a risk, I can't do that, I have to say, why is it a risk? What's the worst that could happen? Really? How likely is that? And what do you think might stop that? And go through that hazard log and say, actually, these are controls in here. And somebody's written down professional accountability. And she says, I never knew that. And I say, okay, so we as clinical informaticians need to make certain that all users are trained as part of their general training to be critical in their use of health IT systems, because they'll be less critical about health IT than they will about letters they receive. So it's that conversation and seeing where the mitigation sits and going back and doing something about it, rather than just saying, I've done the clinical safety report and I've done the hazard log and I've filled this document in. It's what do we know and who have we told, and did they understand?
Yeah, thanks. Just a question from Jane Curran. Some of my mitigations can't be tested until the system is obviously live. How should I manage this?
I saw that, and actually one of the mitigations, the data mitigations, is testing. And so sometimes you can't prove that it works and stuff like that, and so you might just need to scope your project or your whatever it is, or the phase of your project, and say, okay, we are going to do some testing, and then we'll provide the evidence at the end of that. You just need to make it clear.
Yeah, thanks.
So that's what pilots are for, really, isn't it? Things like that.
Absolutely, and I think the other quick one was around the difference of opinion. We often get this, manufacturer says low risk and the trust CSO says very high risk. How do you square the circle, or other way around? Clive and Maggie, how would you suggest that's tackled? It's a frequent question we get as well.
So I just be careful what I say here around people's perception of risk. So in Clive's world, generally, I have yet to really find anybody who has been killed directly from IT. Okay, we know about meds management and all that sort of stuff, but for me it's around about risk tolerance and acceptance in life. So it's interesting you mentioned the manufacturer and the trust. So generically, trusts are more risk averse than manufacturers. It is the case. A manufacturer takes risks by virtue of being a manufacturer. It makes commercial decisions. NHS trusts are generally more risk averse. So you tend to get that general not disagreement, but variance on what is a risk. And I think that's actually very healthy. And it's a wonderful opportunity to actually explore it. And probably the answer is somewhere between the middle, if I'm honest.
And sometimes it's not helped by this sort of this linear this division between 0129, 0160, because in actual fact most of the time there's a co-productive bit going on, and because you're not just getting an off-the-shelf project which you're deploying. So I think that idea, use the hazard log as a tool, not as a hoop to jump through, to describe the conversations, to structure the conversations, to say, okay, what could go wrong here? What do you think? What do you think? And then that subjective bit about assessing the risk is easier to get to, and you will build consensus, and then it won't be the manufacturers trying to hoodwink the trust or the CCGs or looking at that. It will be a collaborative and co-productive approach.
Sorry, and I'm just sorry, Sebastian, just having had a look at Paul's comment. One of the things I used to get in BT, Accenture, Cerner, whatever, was phone call, Clive, you need to talk to this person because he alleges that your system has killed somebody. That's the sort of statement you get as a starter for 10, you know? So, you know, you just sort of take a deep breath. And then I ask the following questions. In the last 7 days, how many times has this incident happened? To whom? And I'm trying to get some quantification about measures. And the discussion just falls apart because all it is, it's an emotional response to get a reaction. And when you break it down and try and get some description about how often does this happen, what's the measure you used, how did you make that assessment that the patient's going to be killed, you know, and that sort of thing. You then realise that sometimes risk management is an emotional thing, and you need to take the emotion out and have some measures. Or you need,
or dare I say it, Clive, you need to acknowledge the feelings. I think that's why I think clinical risk management is about clinical transformation, because it's actually hearing what people say and not trying to catch them out, but get them to express it in a way that adds value, and then that's comforting in itself. So I think it's part of the change management, and I don't think it should come in at the end. It should be part of what we do. Yes, it's a mandatory requirement these days, but actually it's a really, really useful tool. It's a really good useful way of structuring your transformational conversations. So just genuinely saying, oh, okay, what could happen then? Because I know what it's like. You go through your clinical life and you're juggling everything, and you think, oh, that's a risk. And nobody taught me in clinical practice to use that structured approach to thinking about it. And anyway, I wouldn't have had time because I was too busy being a hero or something. But to somebody to have that conversation with me, to tease that out, would have helped me feel listened to, would have made me do my job better, and would actually have a better outcome as well. So think of it as sort of almost like reflective practice, really, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just changing my screen and found some hands raised. So I want to bring some live people in on the call if we could, to make some. Struggling to keep up with the chat at the moment from my end. Paul Llewellyn had a question. You had your hand raised, Paul. Paul.
Hello, Maggie.
Hiya. You're right.
Not bad, thank you. Not so bad. Just to add to the last. It was just to add to the comment I made and Clive's response. One of the challenges I face as NHS Mail safety officer is that I've yet to see a 0160 safety case. So, produce the hazard log, we socialise that, but there seems to be this idea that it's, amongst many, that it's, guaranteed email delivery, and it's pretty much just email. What could go wrong? But I know what it's used and abused for. It's pertinent to this session because we've got a virtual visit solution which will be going live later this year, which is a mix of Microsoft Bookings, Teams, and Outlook Calendar. And it is really challenging in this role that I can, produce a safety case and hazard log to fulfill the 129 obligation, but not to have that, or not to have confidence that those controls are built in at a local level. So just to demonstrate we get 12,000 service tickets a month. Obviously, I don't go through all of those, but the ones that are raised as clinical incidents come to me. And it's quite challenging because I can't contact each user directly. I have to through the service desk. I just don't have the capacity to do that. What I did do is introduce a triage form just to ask if they'd implemented their business continuity plans, what controls have they implemented, do they have a safety case, have they informed their safety officer, that sort of thing. Sounds a long-winded form, but would only take about 20 seconds to complete. The service desk, anybody that raises an incident, that form is passed across, and they're expected. I yet to have a single form come back to say that they've informed the CSO. I've yet to have any controls documented that they've implemented, and it's quite scary, and it's quite disheartening as well. So yeah, just wondering, Maggie, Clive, I'm sure you've come across that, but if you've got any insights or if you've also experienced this at a local level.
Yeah, so I'll answer that briefly. So I had the same issue, Paul, on a smaller scale, but the same sort of noise, people bang the door. So I think part of it is some people use clinical risk as a way to prioritize a problem, and when you strip it down, it's probably not a clinical risk, but they're frustrated because they have no other vehicle for getting that logged. So one of the things might be actually, and this is just about thinking out of the box, is don't look at your own process, but what are your colleagues doing about how they manage the triage of issues relating to NHS mail, for example? Because if you're getting a disproportionate amount of people using clinical risk, it might be a conduit or an indication that there's a bigger problem around the service management side. Number one. To your point about the triage, I agree with you. My first response to any of those people that phoned me up and gave me a hard time was, who am I speaking to? Question would be service user, right? Have you raised it your clinical safety officer? No, fine. Have you ranked it? Silent. So my suggestion to them is, I'm not actually doing anything until I have a sensible discussion with your clinical safety officer using a pre-agreed and completed form to have a meaningful discussion about an issue, and just try and sort of push back and say, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with everyone's subjective view about how rubbish the world is. What I need is to make it a little bit more objective. Completing the form, having a discussion with an appropriately qualified person in clinical risk vis-a-vis the clinical safety officer would be a good start. So I'm with you, Paul. Push back.
And Paul, and I think it's this group, and it's a moot point. Is this the people on this call who are interested in clinical safety and clinical informaticians and friends of clinical informaticians or what have you? We need to set the expectations. Okay, so we need to there'll be a huge variation in what people's needs are depending on the context, but I think my request is that we carry on doing that thinking. What works well, what doesn't work well, what can we put out there so that actually across the UK there is an expectation of what best practice and what sensible, realistic, proportionate practice is, and then start infiltrating. Because I don't think people are not getting it right because they don't care. They're not getting it right because they don't know, or actually it's too onerous, and therefore they put it on the back burner. So let's keep it simple, and develop a coherent sort of, or at least an agreement about how we think things should be prioritised, and put that in place.
Okay, just Sebastian here again. Just fall on that. I think that maybe I'll be picking up on this outside the meeting as well, Paul. There is a gap there. I think we recognise that. So there was another general question here about safety engineer roles, and probably one to the group rather than for me personally or for Maggie or Clive. Does anybody have safety engineers support as CSOs out there? I haven't come across any. We use that model in NHS Digital with having engineers supporting the CSOs, but it would be interesting to see anybody raise hands or shout out if they do have somebody who works alongside them as a safety engineer with kind of software knowledge. Don't know whether that's anybody out there. Clive, have you come across?
I actually work with them. So Sebastian, I'm a contractor. I have to be very careful about my skill set, and I work with a core group of people that do clinical risk, information governance, medical devices, GDPR, all that. And one of the critical things is safety engineer. So let me give you an example about the value of a safety engineer. So I'm currently doing some work around interfaces. So this is an SME company that has a product that dovetails into a primary care system for the purposes for one specific purpose. So when it comes to, is it safe? You have all these issues around, is data taken? Is data shared? What happens to the residual data? There's a whole raft of technical things. So having the ability to speak to somebody who is interested in safety, but not necessarily a clinical safety officer, but comes from a quasi-engineering technical background, adds a completely new dimension to the integrity of any of the outputs. So my honest answer is, Sebastian, I'm fortunate. Without that, I would be only 80-20 complete, really. So yeah. I can't begin to tell you the value of having a safety engineer.
Okay.
And I just go back.
I'm just going to remind you we've got two more minutes to run. I wanted to try and draw discussions to a close shortly, but
I have just shared
Maggie.
This on the screen. Just go back to this model again. Here we are, clinically, data protection, technical. And the conversations I had in NHS England for the rapid procurement, we were all together in a room looking at it together, because some of the things I didn't understand, I could ask them. It's that bit about that, doing it as part of the whole rather than separate groups. So absolutely. And some of them won't need it, but you may need a technical, a software engineer. It depends upon on what it is you're trying to do with what.
Yeah.
But
okay.
do it all together.
Thanks, folks. I'm aware of time, so I'm trying to finish at 2:30 exactly. But I just wanted to open this up to the group a bit and just talk for one minute on kind of taking this SIG group further forwards with the national CSOs. This is your group, folks. It's not owned by me or Clive or Maggie, but it's a chance that members have to contribute. And to ask questions and also to present. So we're always looking for new topics to come forwards to us for presentation. The next session, we have these every 3 months at the moment. So we'll be looking at some dates probably in December, January time. But we're looking for new ideas and individuals who can come forwards and present. But I'd like just to, I think today's session's been really useful around this. And I know Maggie and Clive have put a tremendous amount of time into preparation of this in a very coordinated and useful way, and it's generated a huge number of questions. I haven't been able to keep up with the kind of question flow, so I'm normally fairly quick at the questions, but it's so a lot of questions being asked. But if any of you have ideas, do let me know via Joe. We will be allowing full slide access. I think Maggie and Clive, we confirm that, and we also will have recordings of this on the faculty website. So just like to thank you both again for your time, Maggie and also Clive, and also for Joe Jubb and for Christian for helping the kind of pulling the meetings together, which again are a lot of work. But thanks very much. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to address all the questions, but as always, we are there to kind of support and take this meeting forwards to the next time. So I'm going to close the meeting. Just wanted to say a kind of group hello and goodbye, really, and thanks for your time. So thanks very much for your time. I'm going to say goodbye, and we're going to close formally. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.